So, welcome back to a part 2 of American history. Let's get back into it. We left off where Abraham Lincoln got assassinated. After this, America's new president was Andrew Johnson, which added no new states, but he was a part of the Reconstruction era of the United States. What was the Reconstruction era, you ask? Well, it was the era the United States needed major repairs after the Civil War, like reconstructing the buildings that got destroyed in the war, and things like getting the South back to join the Union, or America. And also got African Americans to vote in 1867. A few years go by, and the South joins the Union again in 1870. The president was Ulysses S. Grant, who was the first person who fought in the Civil War, and he got one new state, was Colorado, in 1867. So this period was the Wild West period. I mean, as fun as it sounds, the real Wild West was bland, and the entire era, there were like 8 bank robberies. A lot of them were stagecoach. Though, a lot of people were farming, and they were farmers. Again, this has been a trend throughout the presidents, but I found nothing. America really started to get more railways and trains, and the invention of the trolley, which was a small city train, and made in 1883. After Ulysses S. Grant was Rutherford Hayes, which again did nothing I could find. The next president was James Garfield, who only lasted 1 year in 1881 and died of an assassination. So Alexander Graham Bell, the guy who made the first telephone, operated on James but failed and got infected and died. The next president was Chester Arthur, who I could find nothing interesting of. Next president was Grover Cleveland, got of Washington, Montana, North and South Dakota, all in 1889, and also found nothing. The next president was Benjamin Harrison. He added Idaho and Wyoming in 1890. The next president was Grover Cleveland again. He was elected 2 times. He added Utah in 1896. The next president was William McKinley, which also did nothing. So let's talk about the Industrial Revolution. Basically, they industrialized and made more engines, automobiles, and made factories they could do stuff with more factories. There was a guy who made the first automobile, which was Henry Ford in 1896. Also, there's a guy who invented basketball. And now we jump into the 1900s, where this new president, Theodore Roosevelt, there was a story about a failed assassin, where Theodore Roosevelt was giving a speech, and the assassin shot through his paper, but the bullet didn't hit him. Roosevelt opened the first national park in 1806. Plus, there was these brothers who made the first glider in 1803. Roosevelt added Oklahoma in 1807. The next president was William Taft, who added New Mexico and Arizona in 1912. So there was this boat called the Titanic, which sank in 1912, and the survivors went to New York by the Carpathia. I don't know, just a little fact. Guess what time it is? It's time for World War I. America didn't get involved in World War I for this part, but a little later, America wanted to take down the Germans, who were wanting to take over the world, literally. So who won the war? Well, it was the Allies, which also teamed up with America and didn't want Germany to win. So it's the 1920s, and America said that people shouldn't manufacture alcohol, but they'd never said anything about consuming it. But this led to crimes and criminal activity. A few years later, Prohibition ended, and everyone was happy, and people were buying and buying and buying. But then something happened that would change America for the next couple of years. While people were buying and the market couldn't handle it anymore, and it went into so much debt that this became known as the Great Depression, which my great-grandma lived through, so she's going to share a story or two about living in the Great Depression.
My daddy was a successful businessman, but the Depression hit around 30 or so, and he lost his business, and we became very poor, and we didn't have a car. We had to live with my grandmother, and she had a 2-story house, and we lived upstairs in one of the bedrooms, but we cooked in her kitchen. When I started this school, I was 6 years old, and my grandmother got a job in a sewing room in Fort Worth and paid for my tuition at church school. It was $1 a month, and she had to get a job that she could afford to pay my tuition at $1 a month. I'd walk to school with a friend. When I was 6 years old, we walked about 10 blocks to school. And I remember one day we didn't have anything much for my lunch. I had to take a lunch. And my mom put some butter and sugar between the 2 heels of a loaf of bread. You know what the heels are? The ends of the bread. And then she didn't have anything to wrap it in, so she wrapped it in some newspaper and put it in a great big grocery sack. And that's what I carried to school for my lunch that day. But I never knew I was poor. I had one little sister, and my mother and my grandmother sewed, made beautiful clothes for us out of feed sacks and things, but they were pretty. And we never did feel poor. We didn't have anything. My daddy would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go down to the farmer's market in Fort Worth, and he had a old truck, and he would load it up with fresh vegetables, tomatoes, green beans, and onions, and squash, and whatever they had. And then he would go up and down the streets in our neighborhood, and he'd holler out, "Vegetable man coming, vegetable man coming." And then the ladies would come out, and they would buy the vegetables from him. And he did that for a long time. And then in the evening, when he got through with his route, whatever he didn't sell that day in the truck is what we had for supper. So we ate pretty good. We had fresh things to eat, and we ate pretty good.
So how did America recover from the Great Depression? It was thanks to Franklin D. Roosevelt, which was unlike the last president did something to solve it. First, he stabilized the government and its economy. Honestly, I don't know what happened in the 30s, so let's move on to the 40s, which started off with another world war, which surprisingly was Germany again and wanted some more and take over the world again. Wow, Germany likes taking over stuff a lot. Basically, America and all the allies from the First World War wanted to take down Germany. So this was the most famous one of the most famous battles that happened in World War II. America, which was D-Day in 1944. This took place in Normandy, France, which the Germans took over France. And basically the US, Canada, and Britain and more allies helped. As I said, D-Day was in Normandy, which was on a beach and one of the most famous battles in World War II. Also in 1944, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which the USA returned and attacked Japan. A year later, Germany surrendered to the Soviet Union in 1945. So a little after this, America, Soviet Union, and Great Britain, or Franklin D. Roosevelt, Stalin, and Winston Churchill, they held meetings and basically bordered situations like what land is yours and mine. Meanwhile, in America, a small company called McDonald's opened area-wide in 1954. Also, music started to show. So let's get back to the Soviet Union and America. They didn't agree on what the person wanted, and they didn't want what the other person wanted to do. And soon they threatened each other with bombs. And there was a little something called communism, which was a bad thing for America, and the Americans went into Vietnam to clear communism. What happened to the soldiers wanted to clear everything and everyone. Meanwhile, a little northeast of Vietnam was Korea, and America also went there and was developing communism. So America basically divided North Korea into North and South Korea, and still is today. After these two wars, America and the Soviet Union was in the space race, basically to see who could land on the moon first. So a little after this, Alaska and Hawaii were added to the states, and in 1950. After this, a little more stuff were happening in America. And the black, which the whites thought were more superior than them. There was this one guy called Martin Luther King Jr., which gave speeches about his dreams and how people should have equal responsibilities. Also, this one lady, Rosa Parks, which she got on a bus, and the bus was divided into two parts, which was the blacks in the back and the whites in the front. Rosa Parks sat in the seat. Then this guy said to get out, but she refused, and then finally they got so impatient that they put her in jail. But a few months later, the blacks stopped going on the buses, and the buses started going out of business. Then the buses started letting blacks sit wherever they want on the bus, and a few years later the blacks were allowed to do what the whites did also. A little later, the President John F. Kennedy got assassinated in Dallas, Texas, and the next president was Lyndon B. Johnson. So America sent Neil Armstrong to go on the moon, as well as Buzz Aldrin. So finally in the 70s, Vietnam won the war and Americans got sent back. And in 1989, the Berlin Wall finally came down, which before was dividing Berlin into East and West. And in the early 90s, the Soviet Union fell, and these main ones were Russia and Ukraine. Also in the 90s was the invention of the internet. So this is the new century, and these people from Afghanistan didn't like America, so they took planes, crashed them into the Pentagon, the Twin Towers, and luckily one of them crashed into a field, but it was going for the White House. So after this, America went to Afghanistan and basically ruled for a long time. Back in America, The new president was Barack Obama in 2009, which was the first African American president in the history of America. So this new project created in 2007, which was created by Steve Jobs, which was the iPhone. And in 2017, Donald Trump was president. And in 2021, Joe Biden was president and still is. So let's go back a year to 2020, when the virus called COVID-19 was spreading through the world, and everyone had to stay inside and wear masks, and school was shut down. It was a hard time. So now let's go into the Russia and Ukraine war, which is still going on. Well, it was Russia versus America, and America wanted to help Ukraine, and Russia doesn't want them to. I really don't know what's going on. I hope the future will be a better and brighter place. And that was American History Part 2. Make sure to like and subscribe. Goodbye, everybody.